Okay. Ja, det är den där. Okay, during the last hour we're going to deal with the transport law. That may not sound as sexy, but really it's my experience, as I mentioned to you, that there are quite a few logistics people who at once when it comes to questions or legal questions about obligations, it's about, oh no, we won't, that's not our business. But I mean, really knowing this subject, especially when it comes to international transport and logistics, you have sort of say how to include all this knowledge, both as to how to calculate the map the best transport chains, the best way you organize your logistics, but also that you have to take into account the transport law, because that really says something about the real obligations of the parties and what you're supposed to do, and when you sort of say have trouble. We're going to deal with the international transport conventions and what questions they do address. And one very important question is also, you have in your curriculum the role of the freight forwarder, who is really the transport architect here, or the travel agency of the goods that they often called. You have also this question of compensation. We were dealing with that in Incoterms, the risk and loss of goods, and how about delay? I would say when you go to many transport conferences and you ask many people, you have reliability, where's just in time, and you have all this nice expression, but how about the reality when it's delay? How about the responsibility of the parties? And I was, as we spoke about CIF and CIP, this Incoterms, where you as a seller had to insure the goods on behalf on the party at risk, the buyer, but and also when you are at risk, transport insurance is extremely important to bridge the gap, because as we shall see, from a transport law perspective, if you're the shipper or the owner goods, you will often have a very bad case. But then you have transport insurance, so to say, to compensate for this situation. Okay. So what is important, that the international transport conventions, they are for air transport. You have the Montreal Convention today, being signed in 1999. You also have the Warsaw Convention, but many countries have signed this Montreal Convention. What is important to know, that with this international convention, if you have at least the global ones, you have less than 20 countries signing these conventions, they will not be, so to say, active in as such. But the Montreal Convention is the modern convention, in the sense that they take into account these questions of delay. You have a high degree of compensation, and you're also allowed to exchange electronic documents. And here is a sort of very much is going to happen within air transport here during the lives to come. You have road transport, and I mean, you can say the physical perspective of road transport. I mean, if you're in Latin America, you will mostly care about road transport inside Latin America, in Europe, inside Europe, and so forth. Then you have the CMR Convention, going back to 1956. It's much more based on paper documents. You have the rail transport in SIM Convention in Europe, and also for sea. For sea, the picture is really more complex, because you have various conventions. And you not have the same scale of liability, and you same force majeure. You know, force majeure is when you couldn't foresee an event, when you couldn't prevent this event taking place. You can always say force majeure. And this is sort of a hands up. It's we couldn't do anything about it. So then you have the transport insurance again coming to help you. But the liability rules or the sea freight is are different. And also the ship owners as a pressure group have been very strong in the sense that you still have, so to say, liability terms that are very much based on the world of the sailing ships. And that's quite a paradox today, because you know you have no sailing ships at all, and you have GPS systems knowing exactly the location of the boat and so forth. But what is important, though, that these conventions, at the point of departures, they were mostly unimodal, meaning that they were just concerning one means of transport. But then you can see the paradox at once, because as we mentioned with Incoterms, much of international transport is multimodal. You start up with a truck, then you have a sea transport leg, perhaps on the rail transport, and finally another transport on truck, or you have air transport in between. So you have this Rotterdam Convention as an exception, but you also luckily have the so-called network principle in then you sort of say tie up the various conventions, and the basic question is, where did the accident happen? You may say you have some very clear-cut cases if you open a container and it's filled up with seawater, and say, well, this could obviously not have happened during the land transport leg. But in real life, it's often like that at the last leg of the transport, they end up paying if they can be proved. You have the International Freight Forwarders organization called FIATA. You also have a Nordic corporation here, Nordic Freight Forwarders rules, and they sort of fill in the gaps that are not addressed by the transport conventions. The transport conventions to a very large extent deal with A to B transport, but you also have questions of warehousing, we have other services provided by the freight forwarders, and you also have these various roles, as I mentioned to you. So, yep. Okay. So they, you have obligations for both parties. The basic obligation, if I'm the shipper, I'm the owner of goods, I have to make sure that the goods are, the packaging is okay, the marking of goods, the address information is okay. If not, I have a very bad case. I remember working in Kühne+Nagel, that goes for all other logistic service providers, say, hey, you haven't done your job, I have no responsibility. Whereas as a transport company, you have to take care of the goods while they are so-called in your custody. That was the obligation of the buyer. You have the compensation for loss and damage. We'll come back to that. Compensation for delays and claims and deadlines. And here you're going to have some surprises, I'll tell you. Force majeure, the events you couldn't foresee or you couldn't take into account. And also some formalities related to these conventions. Then, as I mentioned to you, traditionally speaking, the freight forwarder, they might have a truck of their own, but certainly they don't own the boats, they don't own the airplanes, so-called. Of course, the main exceptions are the so-called integrated company, so like DHL, UPS, TNT, they own their own or most of their own means of transport. But as far as technically speaking, the freight forwarder is very much like the travel agency of the goods. Whereas the travel agency that you normally address, they take care of you as a person going to Brazil, to Moscow, to whatever places, forth and back again, organizing that trip. So it's really about organizing things. Whereas But here it's been a tendency really, so that today, for example, if you had road transport inside Europe, the main rule will be that you take care as a freight forwarder of what your transport company, what the driver has done as well. So if the goods have been stolen in a warehouse, I, as a shipper, I have to just address you as the principal. So, okay, that's a legal notion. The principal, he takes responsibility, because then I am as a principal, then I turn around and say, hey you, transport company, you done not your job properly, so the compensation I might have to pay to the shipper as such, I reclaim from you, because you are the one who really caused this event. Whereas if you act as an agent, and that you often find in air transport and in sea transport, you will say, okay, I got in touch with Maersk, with Mediterranean Shipping Company, well, with Lufthansa, with KLM for air freight, to say. Can you prove as a shipper that these are not serious organizations, that they are not doing their job? If you can't prove that, okay, you better contact Maersk yourself, you better contact Lufthansa yourself if you have trouble. I was just organizing it a bit, it's not my responsibility, hands up. I have a certain responsibility according to this NSAB, this freight forwarding rules, but this is a very important divide that you have to be aware of. So I mean, if you had no relation with Maersk, I saw, and you go, well, hell, who is going to contact in Maersk? Will they have any responsibility? They'll probably just send you a letter that that's not their case, there are no liability, just to sort of say, make you stop complaining as such. But you have also in the NSAB rules, the Nordic rules, and appose that is most, if you do market that I am the total transport logistics service provider, I take responsibility, and if that's part of your marketing, you cannot come back afterwards and say, oh, well, I didn't mean it actually. I blame Maersk, I blame KLM, you get to know them. And also, legally speaking, if you issue a transport document in your name, and here we have some curious examples. For example, Kühne+Nagel, they have a paper, they act as paper ship owners registered in Hong Kong. You have the same with DB Schenker. They don't have a single boat of their own, but the very freight document, the bill of lading, the seaway billing is in their name. So in that sense, they act as a principal. But whereas, for example, Hewold Shipping or some other smaller freight forwarder, they are act as agent for Hapag-Lloyd, for CMA, whatever ship owner. So this is an important note. So how about damage and loss? In this world, folks, it's the weight of the goods that counts. If you have an invoice of $2 million US, okay, in a transport law world, you don't look at the invoice values, not as a point of departure. You look at the weight of the goods. And that may be very okay if you're a stone exporter from Larvik in Vestfold in Norway, that the unit price, the kilo price of the goods may be very low. But if you're selling electronic surveillance equipment, where the price per unit, if you transfer it to kilos, perhaps 1,000 kroner per kilo, then you will have a very lousy deal with these people just counting kilos. Or according to the maritime law, you calculate it in a number of packages. That's an absurd. So you see, You have this called SDR, meaning special drawing right. So what is this animal special drawing now? If you take a dash of Japanese yen, a dash of US dollar, a dash of British pound, and a dash of euros, and you have this trade weighted calculation, then you have what is SDR. If you look at the website of the Norwegian Stock Exchange, Oslo Børs in Norwegian, you find what is called XDR. That is basically the same as SDR. And to put it very simply, it's about the current value is something about 8 to 9 kronas. Meaning that if you have the goods lost or stolen in sea transport according to the Hague-Whisper rules, your compensation will be 2 SDR per kilo, saying approximately 17, 18 kronas. That's what you get from the ship owner. Stop. So I mean, if you have stolen some forest products, perhaps some really low value products, that can be okay. But for most products, it's a very lousy deal. You do have an improvement with the Rotterdam rules. These are increased to 3 SDR and 850 SDR per item. So in that sense, it can be good to have the package to have more smaller packages. But then for the road, you have 833, something like 70 kronas per kilo. You have rails and tire, and of course, you know, with air transport, it's the most valuable good. They also have indexations. By the way, that is not quite correct in your article about air transport. There it's listed 17 SDR. At the present time, it's 19 SDR. So if you want to have it right, here you have it's the current rate.
Is this the standard compensation or is it the maximum?
It's a maximum compensation unless you have a so-called gross neglect. Grov uaktsomhet in Norwegian from the transport company. And gross neglect, I remember one state from the court that you had, you know, they had some packets that were smashed, and you had some of these tractor shoes, you know, or kind of winter boots. They had marks that somebody at the warehouse had just gone like that, treading on the packets. And that was gross negligence. But on the other hand side, you can imagine, I mean, it's kind of a YouTube situation where you have a railway bridge being 3 meters and 90. You have a truck being 4 meters and 20, and then you just whoosh. According to one court case, that was gross negligence, but according to another court case, it is not. So, I mean, it takes quite a lot to get there. And now with the discussions about this new NSA the shippers group, they wanted to extend this obligation to gross negligence, to also to extend it to sea transport and air transport, whereas the freight forwarders are very much against that. Because they say that does not harmonize with the transport conventions, Montreal conventions for air freight, and Rotterdam Hague-Whisper for. So I mean, you shouldn't normally. This would be the best case. You get your compensation SDRs. You could get it the whole. If it's gross negligence, you can point at the invoice. But it's very seldom that you can get it your way. You have also with your force majeure clauses if it's an earthquake or if it's a general strike, things like that. They say that, well, we couldn't foresee that, we couldn't possibly avoid this. Then you don't have the chance. Then, and latest important is you claim after the deadline, and these deadlines are quite short, then you're too late actually. And then finally the owner of the good has not fulfilled your obligation, and the same was marking the goods, packaging goods properly, they were suitable for transport, if I'm a Spanish grower of tomatoes and send the tomatoes by an open car truck in the middle of Norwegian winter, say then I really not fulfilled my obligation. So I should know that that would be a catastrophe. Yeah.
Let's say you have a Norwegian exporter of fish, putting the packs of frozen fish on weak pallets. And these pallets break down during sea transport due to heavy weather conditions in the North Sea. Would you say that this would be the latter point? Owner of the goods have not fulfilled their obligations, or could the shipper say this is force majeure, it's a weather condition, or how would you evaluate a case like that?
Well, I suppose as a point of departure, I would argue like this, that you hadn't do the packaging properly. But if you go back to the statistics and say we always did like that, so you might have a better case. But
this could also be traded off against the how well the cargo is secured on board the vessel.
Yeah.
If it's allowed to move about, then they would need a stronger pallet maybe.
Yes, so exactly.
There's a lot of tricky...
Yes, indeed. But when the goods are in the custody of the transport company, they have a responsibility. But here again, you have also this question about who is the freight forwarder. Is he a principal or an agent? If he's an agent, he can very well turn around and say, okay, this ship owner normally do that job, so if you have any questions, please address them to the shipping company. Hands up for me. But if you're a principal, then you face the music and say you are paid the compensation, and afterwards, then you turn around, hey you ship owner, we have something to discuss. So sort of that's the way it works, actually. Yeah, and how about delay? If you have by road transport, it's the freight cost is compensated. So, but imagine, and if you have some very valuable goods going by truck to Munich, and the invoice value of the goods is 1 million kroners, and the transport cost will be 25,000 kroners. So what you get from compensation according to the CMR convention is 25,000 kroners. And that's not much to boast of. With rail freight, if you have the same transport bill, you will get 75,000 kroners, but it's still way ahead from this 1 million kroners. Air transport, you have the same as for damages and goods. For sea and transport, actually, the goods should not always be delayed. They should also be evidently be lost, considered lost or damaged, so in order to get this compensation. But an interesting thing, the market is moving along, and I remember last year when I was here, somebody was writing a thesis about Maersk, Daily Maersk. Are any one of you dealing with that now, or? Because that has been a kind of revolution in the sea freight business. Maersk has done a promise that if they are too late, they will compensate the shipper. Although with a high amount, but I think it's something like $500 US per container. And it may be interesting to see if this is going to happen. But even in the Rotterdam Convention, you have Article 21. I mean, if you read that, it says somehow, somewhat, if the ship owner is delayed, you can have a compensation, but it's definitely not a clear-cut case. And it was a very hard negotiation. So, I mean, these notions, ETA, estimated time of arrival, ETD, estimated time of departure, they are very much the, I mean, you take all well, you try to make sure that you have no responsibilities for delay as a ship owner. And because you do have opt-out. Yeah, sorry.
You said that the SDR is the maximum you can get, the 19 or the other amount at the other slide. So can the two parties negotiate in the contract which SDR they want or they will?
You could do that, and I know some big companies do that. I happen to know a lawyer that is acting on behalf of Volkswagen, and they get much better compensation because they are so huge, and it's a dream of every transport company to have such customers. So they have a much better deal. But you can also, I mean, if you're in some bulk commodities where you ship thousands of tons, for example, waste paper. That is a great export article in the United States, by the way. And we have extreme low value. So then perhaps 2 SDRs will suffice. You may say that, well, I even take 1.5 SDR. So you do have and that was a very important topic in the Rotterdam Convention, that you had the possibility to opt out to choose another term, but because most companies would like to base themselves on these terms. Yes, as I mentioned, for better or for worse, you can. So, but because of this, you see that for most shippers, whether being sellers and buyers are good, is that because first the amount of compensation is pretty limited, and also we have these procedures. When it comes to sea freight, you just have 3 days to complain. When it comes to road transport, you have 7 days. Then you turn around the burden of proof. So if you're the transporter, I say if I complain in 7 days, okay, you have to prove that you're not doing anything wrong. But then if I'm after 7 days, I have the burden of proof. And if that's more than 14 days, it's game over for me. So both is the value, the procedure, the constraints make that, especially for those who have valuable goods, you take into account. But the reason for the rules being like this is, remember that the big freight forwarders, they handle goods worth billions of kroners every year. And if they should fully compensate for the invoice values, I can promise that the transport prices would be much more higher than today. But here you can have the transport insurance companies, and they adjust the risk issues. They are also related to the value of goods. So here you can get compensation. But here again we come back to Incoterms, because you must ask the questions, do I have the risk? Or is it the other party who is at risk? I give an example. Just, the problem of misunderstanding the whole thing. It was a Norwegian export company who sold goods to Italy in Napoli, and where they agreed on the ex-works term. As you may remember, or you can see at the brochure, the ex-works term is the minimum obligation of the seller versus the maximum obligation of the buyer. But nevertheless, the seller arranged the transport, they organized the transport, and they even made a deal with the insurance company, and perhaps not knowing that they were paying the premium, the transport insurance premium. What happened though, that this consignment, that was an extremely valuable one truck, the invoice value was 10 million kroners. It was stolen somewhere in Italy. And that was quite a nightmare actually, because the party who had signed this insurance contract, they were not at risk. Because if you see at Incoterms brochure, the X works, the buyer is at risk for the whole transport. But there is sort of said by the transport insurance companies admitting that they have themselves done some formal mistakes. So only the party at risk can transport insurance. And as I mentioned to you, if you sell on CIF and CIP terms, you are obliged to insure on behalf of the buyer. And as I mentioned to you, we have A, B, and C terms. And the snag with the CIF and CIP, that if you're not aware of that at the buyer, you always insure, you can insure on minimum terms. A Norwegian importer of goods in the east part of Norway, they bought a machine from China worth 10 million kroner. The Chinese sellers secured on C terms, minimum terms. This machine was destroyed in Rotterdam due to bad handling, really. Perhaps it just fell off the hook or something like that happened. But anyhow, the end of the story said that the Chinese insurance company said, well, I hear what you say, Norwegian buyer, but this insurance, minimum insurance, does not cover this event. So they just had to carry the machine to the scrap heap. And was pretty tragic. Whereas I mentioned on the A terms, this would typically be covered. You also have extra clauses for war, for term of goods, and you can also insure your goods for delay. And you have a general coverage. You make a calculation of the estimated value of your export imports for a year, for a period, and then you make an insurance according to that, or you can have an insurance for dedicated to that very transport. And of course, the big advantage for the seller and the buyer is that the insurance companies take as a point of departure the invoice value. They are not looking at kilos or number of packets as they do in transport law. And you also have an estimated loss, normally calculated 10% of the invoice value. Of course, what is another advantage of using transport insurance, that you can profit from a network of an insurance company, that they have surveyors around inspecting the goods, and they are very good at transport law, so they are sort of matching the expertise of the transport companies. Finally, also they can give good advice as to the packaging of the good and the marking of goods.
These A, B, and C terms, are they according to some international standards or agreements? Or?
Yes, that's right. They are according to London Institute cargo clauses. That is actually international rules, but Norwegian rules are actually said to be a bit better than the standard rules, so they are more in favor of the shipper. So you have it's written in Incoterms. So let's see. Yes. Yes, by the Institute Cargo Clauses, it's called here. Yes, London. Yeah. So that is the reference. Okay, some final words on freight forwarders regulation. I say, legally speaking, you take as a point of departure these transport conventions when they are signed by the country. They are also implemented in the country, and Norway, like many other countries, have signed this. But as I mentioned to you, On some, especially with maritime transport, the liability regime is much more complex. But as this, to some extent, are a bit old-fashioned in the sense that they deal with, so to say, more transport as such rather than logistic services being in addition to this. You also have this freight forwarders regulations in the Nordic countries, the NSAB, and I mean stress the Nordic countries. You do have these Fiat rules that are to some extent model on that. And what is quite interesting today that you are revising this Incoterms now, so there will be some new rules in probably in 2014.
Are they not also applied quite a lot in the Baltic countries? I seem to have heard that, but I'm not sure.
Maybe there is an extensive cooperation between Nordic and Baltic countries, but of course if the transport company, if you use Bring for example, as is a Norwegian company, or some Swedish or Danish one, DSV for example, a Danish-based company, they will, you can see on their contracts issue or even at their emails at the very bottom say we do the transport according to NSAB. But well, if you use a Baltic transport company, I'm not so sure that you should at least not take it for granted. So the one thing they cover, you have these networking principles. I mean, they say where can you locate the damage of the goods? We mentioned that. That is more clearly speaking. You also are speaking out the role of the principal and the agent. The shippers today want the freight forwarders are the general rules to take the role as the principal, because it's much easier for the seller and buyer of the goods saying, yeah, I'm going to address you only. What happens behind the curtains, that will be your job. Whereas many, especially small freight forwarders, say, hey, we can't be in charge of what every air company or ship owner is doing. So here we have some fairly lively discussions. And then you have the delay and responsibility. The shippers have proposed that you have the 4 times the freight value in a new NSAB. And I think the freight forwarders won't agree to that. You have this lien, or what's called pant in Norwegian. So if someone, the one could not, if I'm almost broke, that will be the most practical situation, and I can't pay the freight bill, the freight forwarder has the possibility of selling your goods in order to get compensated for not having been paid. You also have some rules as to the storage of goods, but these goods have only been applied to a limited extent as to export and import customs and documentary service. That is what should be the responsibility if I'm a freight forwarder and I do not do a proper job with filling out the trade documents, for example. You have advice acting as a third or fourth party logistics service provider. You also have electronic data interchange and liability. So what if I have some problems with sending the messages? Is it primarily the responsibility of the freight forwarder or the shipper? And also tenants and secrecy, and having been inside this world, it's very competitive world, and the shippers are not always that loyal. So if I'm, for example, from DSV and my colleagues has worked for a week on a tender, and I say, okay, you made some interesting point there, but I just delete the name on DSV and I send it there directly to Kühn & Nagel and DB Schenker, can you do a better job? And you say, well, you can say that's pretty illogical. That's bad business behavior, so I should have some compensation and there should be some secrecy. But I also doubt that this is going to be accepted. Some questions as to transport law? Well, then just to sum up, the transport law here, in transport law is something different from Incoterms. Incoterms is sales law. This is transport law, and it is the obligation of parties. And as a shipper, you have to make sure that your addresses, your packaging, your labeling of goods, and also information about if it's dangerous goods, that this should be in order, so that the transport company should know what they're doing. On the other hand side, when the goods are in their custody, the transport company has to take care of them in a proper way. Then again, you have the question, in what role will a freight forwarder in particular have? Will there be a principal facing the music for all, or will it just be an agent, so to say, having organized transport? But if I'm as a shipper have trouble, say you have to go to the ship owner, the air freight company directly. Now that's a major divide. Then, as mentioned to you, the compensation in transport law is mostly according to the kilo of the goods, not the invoice value, or as in maritime transport, the item on an item level. Then, also as to delay of the goods, in NSAB, the general rule is as to the freight, the cargo bill or the invoice, not the invoice for selling the goods as such. And also the procedures where you have to claim very quickly as well in order to get some compensation. You do have this possibility if it's gross negligence or the transport company, you can get the whole invoice value compensated. But as I mentioned to you, that will be indeed the exception and not the rules. So then you may say that, okay, then how about the shipper then, or seller buying the goods? Wouldn't they end up in a very bad situation? But it's just to compensate for this, like that you have transport insurance. And the one who should have transport insurance, that is actually a close link to Incoterms, and when you ask who is at risk. And those who is at risk, he has the possibility to get compensated according to transport insurance, and that takes into account the invoice value of the goods. But then you also have what does the insurance cover? Then you have this basically A, B, and C insurance. The C insurance, just to mention some words about that, they cover transport accidents, and of course that's what's on. You see on the news, the plane is crashing, the boat is sinking, the truck is left is destroyed, accident like that. But the real the challenge, statistically speaking, as I mentioned to you, in 40+% of the cases, goods are lost and damaged during the handling, and that is often occurs between these various transport legs. Then you have goods being stolen, that's something like 20%, something like 12-13% due to intrusion of seawater. And none of these accidents that are statistically the most likely one to happen in international transport are covered by the C terms. Okay, any more questions at the very end?
I'd like to say Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Just a glimpse of something that could have a full semester, a full
Mhm.
course. But thank you so much.
Mhm. Thank you. Mhm.
Okay, next week there will be no ordinary lecture as it's supposed to be on Frother. My colleague Stein is going away on Thursday, so we will be recording a video early